Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of Show Us Your Kit. I'm very excited about this one. I'm joined by Jason Guy from the Wolf Whistle podcast. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm not too bad. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Once again, I've been really looking forward to this. Fellow Wolves fan like me as well, which is fantastic. But yeah, the podcast is going from strength to strength. In fact, we've recently broke through 32,000 downloads. And listen, I started it off on a bit of a whim, really, and all I wanted to do was, interview a few former players, and I didn't realise how well it was going to take off. So, thank you for the invite on today on your great show.
That's all right. So you can find Jason on Twitter at Wolves Premier, as well as his podcast, Wolf Whistle Podcast as well. But not only are you known for your podcasting, you're fundraising as well. Nearly £250,000 raised for cancer research. So just tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, my wife passed away of triple negative breast cancer 6 years ago now, and she initially started the fundraising. Our aim was just to raise £1,000, and we did that in our first weekend by selling wristbands, and so that went through the roof. And then the first year, I think we raised 10,000, and then with the kindness and generosity of people on social media and all the events that we do, you're quite right, we're now just under $250,000. In which is now our 7th year of fundraising, and we never expected it to get this big, but here we are. And thank you to all the kind people that have donated.
Amazing. So where can people find a link to that to donate if they'd like to?
So if they go on to the website www.legacy4lucy.co.uk, or follow me on Twitter at Wolves Premier. And there's plenty of ways to donate and help, find a research and a cure for an illness which, believe it or not, affects 55,000 women in the UK each year. So any support is appreciated, especially during these challenging times.
Yeah, very good. So just to come back to your podcast as well, some of the ones that I've listened to, I don't know how you've managed to... Well, how have you managed to get these kind of people on there? You've got, former managers and recent managers in Terry Connor and things like that. How have you built that sort of black book of contacts?
To be honest, I don't know. I mean, initially it started helping the Wolves All-Stars from Eve. So I know a few of the former players that play, and they've we've traded stories in the changing rooms, and I just thought this would be a great podcast, and so other people could listen. So I started with all the people who, I'm friends with. Mel Eves, Dale Rudge, Colin Taylor, John Purdy, etc. And then I've challenged myself, and there's been, like, quite rightly, as you've said, we've had Carl Henry, Michael Kitely, Dave Jones, Graham Turner, Colin Lee, Terry Connor, John DeWolf. We're working on Ludo Polle. So yeah, I've got a little black book of all these contacts, but they've all agreed to come on, and it's just been amazing. And we've had Andy Gray as well, another massive name, but I'm working on so many more. I think we've done now, I think there's been 50 odd different players, maybe more than that, maybe even 60 now. And we're still doing one a week. And I've got another, believe it or not, I've got another 70 lined up. Wow. So I think we're going to be busy for the next couple of years at least.
Yeah, brilliant. Keep us all entertained, and you certainly kept a lot of people entertained during lockdown as well. But who's been your favourite one, or what have been the favourite stories that you've heard from these interviews then so far?
I've got to say, my favourite one has been either Dave Jones or Colin Lee, and that's because obviously it's always great to hear a manager's perspective. And Dave Jones, I was there that day in Cardiff when we got promoted. And, we've been waiting so long for that moment. And it was Dave that obviously achieved it for us, so it was huge. Where Colin Lee was interesting was I didn't know some of the stories. Some of the stories he was coming out with, I was like, wow. And he didn't hold back, and he said what he thought of Jez Moxie, etc. And Jez's one, actually, we're working to get on the podcast. But so that might be one for the future. But one of the most interesting stories was John Purdy. Now, John's a mate of mine, and it's just a great story where he used to walk across West Park to the game, and he'd be chatting with fans on what the score would be, and they didn't even know he was playing. I mean, now with social media and the way it is, everybody knows everybody. in terms of who's playing, especially, the players. And John were quite unrecognisable, and he blended in with the crowd, and they didn't even know he was playing.
I've got to ask you as well about the Dave Jones podcast, because you reached quite a wider audience for that one because of certain Jeff Stelling. How did you deal with that flack?
I mean, what was quite interesting was Dave Jones, obviously, for those that don't know the story, Dave Jones was manager of Hartlepool, and Jeff Stelling used his platform on Sky to literally throw him under the bus and say, Dave, get out of our club. And since then, that has affected Dave's chances of employment. Jeff Stelling used that platform really for his own gain, and it really did. It was a real tough time for Dave. And David, I didn't know, Dave had never heard it. So I got the recording, I played it to Dave of Jeff Stelling's rant, and Dave was quite honest in his assessment of it. And, he said, he basically said his thoughts. It's best to listen to the podcast. And Jeff Stelling, then somebody sent it to Jeff Stelling, who then come at me on Twitter. There was a massive argument, and then it got into the Hartlepool echo, and so I got a load of new fans and abuse from Hartlepool, and so that was fun.
Brilliant. Well, I've got a quick story to tell you about Colin Taylor, because I'm a little bit too young to remember him, but at Liverpool away, the last game of last season, I'm standing there the last couple of minutes, and he comes charging down the steps towards me. He puts his arm around me. He goes, and then in his thick Scouse accent, says something about, do you know the only two teams to beat Wolves are, home and away this season? I was like, yeah, Huddersfield and you. And he's like, shh. And then he explained to me how he, used to play for the Wolves. And I was going, I've never heard of you, mate. Never heard of you. But since then, I can't move on social media without seeing him, because he's just in that All Stars thing all the time. And I've done a podcast obviously with him as well. There's you've managed to find quite a few of these lesser known players as well, and got a good story out of them as well.
And what's interesting is sometimes, the bigger name players get less downloads than the lesser name players. So, for example, I'm a good mate of Steve Bull. And, Steve's got some fantastic stories. But if you've seen him at a Q&A, some people might have seen the stories before. Whereas Darren Sinking, Kevin Ashley, and Colin Taylor, they aren't as bigger names, and they know that. However, their story's as important, if you like, and people haven't heard their stories, so they've still got some great stories. So Darren Simpkin, for example, was signed for, I believe, £15,000 from Blakeney Town, and that £15,000 bought the floodlights of Blakeney Town. So, you wouldn't hear these stories. So, there's plenty more gems. We're interviewing Jim Melrose this week. He played 7 appearances on loan for the club. Once again, they've all got great stories from a great era.
Is there anybody who's on a wish list that you haven't got booked yet, but you really hope that you will?
Yeah, I'm working on quite a few, to be honest. I'm working on George Berry. I'm working on Campbell Chapman, who played for Wolves in the very dark days. As I said, we've got Ludo Pole coming on. I've messaged Jez Moxie, so I've got his number, so I'm working on Jez. Mick McCarthy, Glenn Hoddle. So there's some big names, and then one day we might get Frankowski and Sammy Algebert. So
brilliant.
We'll see.
Brilliant. Right, let's get to the first part of the podcast. Then I've asked you to show us one of your kits. Now, you've got probably the most pristine and well-kept collection that we've seen so far. This is your first selection, your Wolves shirt. So from the 1988 Football League Trophy final. Tell us the story behind this shirt then.
So basically, you can go in the club shop now and online, and you can buy the replicas of these shirts. Spore was the manufacturer, and obviously Store Distribution was the sponsor. And I can't remember where I actually picked that shirt up from. It was probably eBay on a drunken night when I've got in from the pub, and I've gone on eBay and I've bid more than I should have. But what's interesting is it's got the actual Football League Centenary logo around the badge, which makes that even more rare, because prior to playing in the Sherpa Van Trophy final at Wembley in 1988, I think literally just a few weeks before, we played in a tournament between 12 clubs, which were the founder members of the Football League. So I got this shirt, and then I went to a dinner with the 1988 team, and as you can see, every player who played in the game, sadly, other than Mark Kendall, who sadly passed away. Shirt, actually, sorry, Floyd Street's not on there neither. So that shirt to me. And what I do like about that team is, I mean, the players are obviously so humble. And, you know, some of them players were literally being paid peanuts then to play for the club. And they dragged the scruff of our neck. You know, Ali Robertson was the captain. And, you know, he'd played bloody 600 games at West Brom. He comes to Wolves, cross the divide, and then we get a day out at Wembley. We get 2 promotions on the bounce. And that was when we were back.
Is there a part of you that sort of misses that kind of era because of the connection that, you know, some of the fans might have had with the lower level of football that they were watching?
I'm going to be honest, yeah, because, look, with the greatest respect, Wolverhampton Wanderers now, we are watching the best team we've ever seen. And you know, this is from fans back who've gone to watch football in the 70s when we were winning trophies, etc. This is the best football they've ever seen. But they are further removed from the working man than ever before. Whereas back in the late 80s, these people were probably earning maybe the same, maybe just a little bit more than the working man. And when they finished their careers, they had to work, you know, and they had to go into normal jobs. And this decadence was almost before them, where they're playing in front of 20,000 fans at the Molineux, and then just a few years later, they're driving vans. You know, they're working in factories, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way, but it must be difficult for people to play in front of 20,000 fans, score a goal, have the crowd sing your name, and then literally a few years later, you're delivering bread, as in Paul Jones' case, was a midfielder, and you know, he was delivering bread, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the decadence, must be. And look, the reality is Ruben Neves, Diogo Jota, and Joe Martinho, they're not going to be working as a delivery driver at the end of the career. And you know what? I'm glad about that, but it just shows how far the club's come.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Right, let's have a look at your next show. I'm quite excited to hear whether this is a genuine piece, if it is actually Bully shirt or if it's just sort of a display.
I must say, yeah, it certainly isn't. It isn't Bully shirt. What's quite interesting is, though, it's a replica shirt. And these England replica shirts are still, they go for good money, actually, and they're still quite rare. And growing up, I remember I started supporting Wolves in about 1987, 1988. And I had my Wolves shirt back then. And this was my first ever England shirt. And that was actually mine that I had. So it's actually a kid size. And and it was obviously the replica shirt of the shirt that Steve Ball made his debut in, bearing in mind at the time he was a 3rd division player back in 1989, and now an England player from the Championship is just wouldn't happen, let alone from now he's League One. And for him to score on his debut once again is just ridiculous. Roy of the Rovers fairy tale stuff. So I did my little homage to him, and I've got a programme, a match ticket. And the actual card that's signed by him was interesting. Back in the day, Beatties had a new sports department, which they invited Bully to open. And he was there, and I went to see him, and I queued up with about 50 other people, and I got my little promo card signed. And that's made the frame as well.
Awesome. I've asked a couple of people of similar ages to you about Bully and comparing him to the likes of Neves and Jimenez, sort of now the heroes, because are they comparable in any sort of way? Because you can say, well, Bully, you know, he scored 306 goals, but never did it in the Premier League. You've got the current team who are doing it, but then we wouldn't have had that had we have not had Bully. Where does he rank to you in terms of players that we've had in the last 34 years?
The way I see it is Steve Ball scored 306 goals for the club, and that record will never, ever be beaten. Because if a player scores 30 goals, or as Steve did, 50 goals in a season, they are going to be gone. Because if a player scores 50 goals, Real Madrid and Barcelona are going to be giving him a checkbook. So he did it at a time where I suppose, he stayed loyal to the club as well. But the argument is he never did it in the top flight, and I get that argument. But he did it at the international stage, which is bigger than the top flight. He's the best, the pinnacle of any player's career is to play in a World Cup. He played in a World Cup. He scored 4 goals in 13 appearances. And if you had the amount of time he had on the pitch during those 13 appearances, it was probably only about 7 games, because a lot of them 13 appearances were substitute appearances. So in those 7 games to score 4 goals at international level is incredible. You know, listen, I'm sure he earned good money towards the end of his career, but would he want to play today? I don't think he would now, because he had a great career when he did. You know, obviously he probably didn't get remunerated as well as he should have had. But yeah, he's the biggest legend in my era supporting Wolves, and I think I can speak for a lot of people in that.
And what's it like then now, having been friends with such a legend? What's that like?
Listen, I've been on golf trips with him. I've stopped in hotel rooms with him, and you have to pinch yourself at first, and then you realise, listen, if there's someone who is literally, he hasn't changed. He's so humble, and this guy's got an MBE. He's been on A Question of Sport. He's got a stand named after him. But you know what? If you met him, and people that do meet him, he's skin and bones. He's just like me and you. He's very humble. And I suppose he has to pinch himself in the career he's had.
Yeah, lovely. Right, let's move on to the next part of the podcast. I think it's going to, your next 2 pictures are going to sort of combine. So we're going to have a look at your favourite sporting photo, which I think, if pushed, I'd probably say it was one of mine, certainly one of my favourite Wolves photos anyway, and that's of Sir Jack during the playoff final, the last couple of minutes of the game. Thumbs up. Talk us through this picture then.
So, I've been a Wolves fan at that point for the past 15 years, and I've seen disappointment after disappointment, manager after manager, players coming down on a final payday from the top flight to come and help us up, and really just there for the money. And it was never going to happen. And I remember seeing the toaster banner, what was it, 19 years, 20 hours, 22 minutes, whatever it was. And saw that, and then it got real then, flipping heck. It's a countdown almost. And I thought, we've waited. That's how long we waited. And then, so at half-time, we're 3-0 up. And Dave Jones tells a very interesting story in his podcast. And he said, the 3-0 up, and some of the players, I think he said to the players, right, you got a choice now. You can either go and defend the lead, or you can go and showboat for the fans. And I think it was just Nathan Blake and Lee Naylor who wanted to showboat. And everybody else was going, no, we've got to get this over the line before Lynchy, Dennis Irwins, etc. So we're 3-0 up. Then Sheffield United get the penalty. So I'm watching at this point, and I'm thinking, here we go. Sheffield United, we're going to score now. A couple of minutes later, they'll get another one. Next thing you know, last minute, they'll pop up with an equaliser. Because we're Wolves fans, we've seen it all before.
Yeah.
As soon as Matt Murray saved the penalty, I still genuinely believed that we was going to draw. I thought, right, even that wasn't good enough for me. And there you go. I think you can just about see on the clock 77 minutes, probably later in the game than that. As soon as Sir Jack put his thumbs up, he basically said, listen, have a party. I mean, I've got hairs in the pretty back of my neck going up now. Listen, guys, you can have a party. We're up. It's done. And it's like he confirmed it, and he told us we were up. And even Matt Murray saving, even a 4th goal wouldn't have comforted me or settled the nerves. It was Sir Jack telling us that, do you know what, we've done it now. And then we went up and he didn't spend any money.
I know. Well, that's what I was just going to say. So my next question was going to be sort of, during the 90s when he was spending all that money, which team do you think would have coped the best in the Premier League at that point?
I think when we lost, was it Crystal Palace or Norwich, and Neil Emblin was playing, and Neil Emblin and Simon Osborne, and there once again, they've been on the podcast, great players, and I just think they would have really, really handled it well, and there was a good squad there, and some big name players, but genuinely a good, talented squad. And in the podcast with Simon Osborne, he said, look, we was looking around the dressing room thinking, how haven't we done this? He said, so we was as frustrated as anyone. And you know what, Sir Jack, to be fair to him, I don't blame him really for look, the rest is history now, so we are where we are. But Dave Jones said to him, I think they said to Dave Jones, what's it going to cost for? So Jack asked Dave Jones, what's it going to cost for us to win the Premier League and to stop up? And I think Dave said, to win the Premier League, it's going to be 60 million. To stop up, it's going to be 20 million. And then he gave Dave Jones a war chest of reportedly 2 million, 3 million pound. So, look, I think our fate was already sealed, but we had a fantastic year in the Premier League, although we was getting beat every week. And we had the legends of Isaac Okoronkwo and Henry Kamara, Oleg Luzhny, all the big guns come out. So, what a season.
Yeah. My memory of the playoff final as well is of, it must have been about 11 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock in the morning, and Sir Jack's Rover coming right through the middle of the crowd. And apparently he asked his driver, I think, to go back round again or something like that, because he just loved the adulation from the fans so much. He was a proper Wolverhampton boy at heart, wasn't he?
I think Dave spoke about that in his podcast, and he said they'd gone round once and he asked his driver to take him round again. And you know what? Rightly so. He deserved all the plaudits and the accolades that he got, because there's not many philanthropists such as Sir Jack Hayward who are going to put, work as hard as they did. And while he was spending all that money at Wolves, he was falling out with his own family because he was spending their inheritance. So I've got to be honest, if I didn't support Wolves and my dad was Sir Jack Hayward, I might not be happy when I see certain players coming in for 2 or 3 million quid. But listen, he got to live the dream. It must be the best thing than to kicking a ball on the pitch for the Wolves.
Yeah. So let's have a look at your final piece of memorabilia, which again, a very smartly presented piece. First of all, who does it belong to? Because it looks like it's a proper match-worn shirt.
Yeah, so this is Kenny Miller's, as you can see, a picture of me and Kenny in the corner. That's Kenny Miller's match-worn shirt from the playoff final. Once again, from my point of view, that for me was the pinnacle of supporting Wolves. It's clearly going to be overshadowed soon with what's happening at the club at the minute. But we'd had to wait so long for that moment. And when we went up, it was just unbelievable. And I've only ever cried at 2 football games. And it was that one. And as soon as Sir Jack put his thumbs up, I was in tears. And the next one was Brighton away, when Jamie O'Hara also stuck his thumb up. And I started crying at that game as well, because I was that angry. I wanted to get on the pitch and rip his head off. Anyway, I didn't and I wouldn't. But the Brighton away game for me was awful, because once again, we had a team there which was capable of winning the championship. And a good percentage of that team seriously didn't care. And key players went hiding all season. And obviously Dean Saunders, the tactical genius, didn't help the situation. But as they say, the rest is history. And with every pinnacle, there's always a roller coaster ride that takes you up and down along the way.
Yeah. So, I wanted to ask you as well about the 3 promotions we've had to the Premier League and sort of ranking them. I think from what you've said, I can imagine that 2003 sits above the rest. But what about the other 2? So the 2 championship winning teams, 2009, 2018, where do they sort of stand?
Well, just to encapsulate the seasons very quickly, in the playoff final is a great way to win a game, but a terrible way to lose one. And the reality is, the team that won the 08-09 championship, as they did, were a better team than this playoff final team. But it's a great day to go to Wembley, have a cup final and win. The 08-09 team, and rightly so, some of the players don't believe, and Carl Henry is well reported saying this, don't believe that sometimes they got the recognition that they deserve. And I do agree with that, to be honest, because once again, Mick McCarthy had took over a team with, I think, his first day of training, there was 8 or 9 players. And then he unearthed some gems in Matt Jarvis, Michael Kitely, Kevin Foley, Sylvan Ebanks-Blake, some unbelievable talent, put it all in this mixing pot and produced an absolutely fantastic team. And then the team that walked the championship under Nuno. Look, this is the reality. That team was to, you hear that story, they're too good for the championship. When you've got Champions League players in the championship, you're going to do it. Yeah. And you know what? Rightly so. We haven't broke any rules. I know the other clubs are bleating about it, but it doesn't matter. We're lucky that Fosun have chosen us. If I had to rank all 3 in order, I would say my favourite day was the playoff final. Secondly, it was 08-09, the way McCarthy had dragged them together. And not, I wouldn't say, I don't want to say last, but thirdly would have to be that team, because I think we knew we was going to win it anyway, but we still did it.
It was like a procession from September, wasn't it, really, that season? We knew that they were so good. Well, let's look forward then to the next couple of seasons. No European football next year, but how do you see the next 2 or 3 years going?
The only problem is with football and the way Wolves have been playing, and comes expectation, and the expectation levels now at Wolves between the fan base is ridiculous. So there's people like me on Twitter who remembered when they weren't the best team in the Midlands, which now we are, and we're now looking to be one of the best sides in the country. So, and I get that some fans are disappointed that we didn't win the Europa League, right? But also, and it's not a case of, we was in League One a few years back. It's a case of, it's been a huge, huge journey. And Fosun, by their own admission, are already ahead of schedule. And look, there's some of the fan base now, which are young lads, 16, 17, and they only know Nuno. They only know this mentality and this winning football. So why wouldn't you have that expectation level? And when you go back as far as we've supported them, we've seen all sorts. So I think sometimes you just have to take stock of it and think, you know what, we're not going to win every game of the season. We're not going to win every competition as much as we want to. There's going to be players we miss out on. But if you look at the structure of the club, right from the very top to, the bottom, if you like, it's unbelievable. The strategies they've got in place, that, where they want to go, the ambitions. We've always had ambitions, but now these are ambitions we can realise. Before, we want to get to the Premier League, want to win the Premier League, want to win the FA Cup. Now we can. We've been saying it for years. Now we can. We're going to get to a point where we can compete with anybody. And we've shown that against the sides in the top six. We've got to an FA Cup semi-final. We've then got to a Europa League quarter-final. We've got Nuno, who, in my opinion, how he wasn't even a nominee for the manager of the year is absolutely beyond me. But, once again, in Nuno we trust. There's going to be a wobble. You see some supporters on Twitter, I ended up round with them half the time, but, silly things, he's in-game management, this, that, the other. He's not perfect. He's not the finished article. No. He isn't. But if you looked at every decision Nuno has made, there's been the good ones far outweigh the bad. And you've only got to look what he's doing with Traore. That's first season under Traore. If they'd have sold Traore for 15 million quid, no one would have batted an eyelid. We wouldn't have cared, wouldn't have been bothered, right? There wouldn't have been people going, we should give him another chance. Nuno worked with him, give him another chance. That player now is possibly worth 60 to 80 million pounds. And that's down to Nuno. Yeah. And along the journey, if we do sell a player, I don't want to see us sell Raul Jimenez. But if we get a ridiculous 80, 90 million pound bid, for example, at that stage of his career, he's going to get a huge signing on fee. He could play for one of the biggest clubs in history. He's 29 years of age. I don't want to see him go, but it could happen. And along the way, look, when we sold Barry Douglas, there was a flipping uproar, wasn't there? Douglas, he's a brilliant free kick taker. He's set pieces. Best left back we've ever seen in history. Can't sell him. But then we get Johnny in, who no one had heard of. And Johnny is, with the greatest respect, twice the player Barry Douglas is. Johnny is an unbelievable player. And they keep unearthing these players. So, and look, the sky's the limit now. What we're watching is unbelievable. I mean, Costa and Cavallero, I didn't want to see them players go.
I know.
We've been proved right. Or should I say, the club have been proved right.
Yeah. One final thing, the fixtures have come out today. The first fixtures I looked for were, of course, our neighbours down the road for the first time in 8 years, the longest time we've ever gone without playing them. Just a word on them and those two games. How are you looking forward to those?
All I'd say is, Tom, that I think we're going to be looking forward to it more than they are. We've already seen the bridge that they're going to be waiting for us on. If you've seen that bridge. Anyway, that little bridge that they're going to make the Hawthorns an intimidating place. Look, this is the reality now. We are levels apart from West Brom, in my opinion. And I'm just so glad how the fixtures have worked out in that it's the West Brom games are both after Christmas. I think the first one's January the 16th, and then the away one's May the 1st, I believe.
Yeah.
I just hope the supporters are back in the stadium then, because look, we can't forget last time we played them in the Premier League, they beat us 5-1, right? It's the greatest achievement in West Brom's history. They're never, ever, ever going to forget about it, right? I tell you what, if it had been 6-1, they could have still put their 6 fingers up on one hand and topped us. That's I'm joking, by the way. But the reality is, they ain't beating us 5-1 again. They can live on that and dine out on that for the rest of their lives. Soon that video will be available in black and white, because this time it's going to be a cricket score in our favour.
Fighting talk. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jason, for coming on. Some really great stories. Don't forget to go and check out his podcast as well, Wolf Whistle Podcast, and Wolves Premier on Twitter as well. Once again, Jason, thank you very much for joining me, and I'm sure that we'll speak again soon.
Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.